Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Web of Wyrd. Now, today, for the first time in a while, I'm going to be with my usual co-host, my brother, Herbalist Pete Jackson Main. Hi, Pete. How are you doing?
Hi, David. I'm fine, thank you. And it's been a long time, I know that. And it seems a million miles away from the last time that we talked, which was when I was in Greece.
Right.
It's all very different now.
Very different. Yes, of course. Your trip to Greece to meet the Johnsons was a very interesting
Party with the
side note.
Johnsons.
Yes. But yes, it's been a while. I did manage to catch up with Emily in between and do a podcast with her, and hopefully the three of us are going to be doing one together soon, which I think would be super cool. But we were just joking before we got on to doing this recording that maybe in the intervening period, perhaps Great Spirit deemed that it might not be such a good idea for us to be jumping onto a call to talk about some of the stuff that have been going on, given the demise of our much venerated monarchy and the leader of that. So I don't think we need to go into that too much right now, because probably we weren't meant to. But definitely we are in the space to talk about a very interesting character who has risen to a place of prominence in British society very quickly, and that is Mr. Rasheed Sanook. As called by Uncle Joe, otherwise known as Rishi Sunak. So where would you like to start with this one, bro?
Well, I think just to point out that how many prime ministers we've had this year so far. I think he's the third, but he's the fifth in a very, very short space of time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this sort of, you almost felt sorry for him when his his prize was stolen at the last minute by Mistrust, our favorite Mistrust.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of spitting image character that she is, with the wonky face and the complete inability to take anything seriously, as far as I can see. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me how she had got there, but maybe there was a darker and deeper plan to that, because she didn't last very long. Let's face it, what was it, 44 days or something? And then it was Rishi's turn again. And it seems like Rishi might have been ready. We weren't ready for him, but now we've got him whether we're ready or not. And I mean, I love Rasheed Sunak, because Sanook, because I don't know, it's just, Uncle Joe. It's such a character, isn't he? God love him. But it's a good one, because we need a tag for Rishi, I think, and that I think is a well deserved one from his superior over the Atlantic Ocean.
Mm.
And I don't actually have much to say about Rishi, except that we all know that he's tied into the WEF, by the nuts, by the looks of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't expect anything from him that will be in any way, shape, or form good for anybody apart from him and his cronies. I mean, he is one of the richest men in Britain. He's married to one of the richest women in the world. The idea that he could ever represent any of us is completely ridiculous. But when it comes down to it, I wonder what they're all up to anyway, because governing the country, they most certainly are not. It is an absolute poop show here, not to use the other four-letter word that I could, family show and all of that. And it really is going from bad to worse. And I think that, many of us are sort of sitting around in absolute bewilderment watching all of this and wondering, why is it that they can't organize the proverbial piss up in the brewery? The whole mismanagement of energy prices. I mean, we know why everybody knows why energy prices are going up. It's not because of Russia or Ukraine or anything like that. It's because of the rules that are constricting Ofgem, and the fact that it's all rigged in favor, as usual, of the people at the top of the pyramid. And I don't see he's going to change that, and I don't think any of them will, frankly. And the only way out that people are seeing is the spectre of another general election. And who have we got waiting in the wings? We've got Buzz Lightyear, Steer Karma, or whatever you want to call him, and he's no better. He's also a puppet of the WEF.
Right.
So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place here, for absolutely sure. And my personal feeling is we ought to just forget about them and just start setting up our own structures. I've said this before, but it seems to me now more than ever we're going to be kind of driven back into our own backyards, so to speak, to back and onto our own resources, because nobody seems to be doing anything for us at all. And there's the usual catalogue, if you like, or narrative of people ranting and raving about the government, what it will or will not do. I mean, having lived 67 years on this planet and been conscious of politics for roughly sort of 55 of those, I guess, I'd have to say that the government has never really done anything for me anyway. And what it did do for me once upon a time, it paid for me to get a degree, or part of a degree. Actually, I actually funded most of that myself, so it's not actually true. My father was earning far too much money for us to get a proper degree. Not that he was a rich man by Sanook's standards at all, but now they've taken that away, and today's kids don't get anything like that. In fact, they get saddled with something like 60 grand's worth of debt to get an education. And until they start really taking those realities seriously, and the realities of people whose wages are failing to keep up with the inflation which they are driving, then I think we all have to rethink this situation very, very hard. And I'm looking at a situation where I personally, as I said to you before, I marshal a lot of people, I look after a lot of people, I manage a lot of people, and what I'm seeing is people just absolutely have no idea what they're doing or where to go for help or what's going to happen. People are in a state of high anxiety. People are running around in circles. They're not managing everyday tasks. They're not listening. They're not able to listen. Their brains seem to be sort of colonized by all of this, fear that's being projected at them the whole time. And whether or not they've taken certain medications or not, the ones who have are possibly a little better off in that sense, because they're sort of numb to a lot of it, as far as I can see. But a lot of people I work with who've done the right thing in our view are now sort of facing a situation where they don't really know what their future is going to be. I mean, none of us do to some extent. But, I'm giving out messages of, rallying cries of hope and positivity wherever I can, because I don't believe, the UK is rudderless, the UK is leaderless, but I don't believe we're all stuffed because of that. I believe we have the capacity, those of us who are thinking clearly, to make something out of all this. But I think there's going to be a lot of turbulence before we finally get to sail into calmer waters.
Right. So quite a bit there, bro, to pick away at. And as always here on the Web of Wyrd, we like to get out the rubbish, the poop at the beginning. And maybe put a few of the politicians out with the rubbish. That would be a good one. But then we're going to work our way through this and see what are the deeper motifs, and also to talk about some plants that we feel are connected to some of the underlying themes behind all of this. So let's kind of wind this back to the beginning of where you started with our new premier in Britain, Mr. Rasheed Sanook, as coined by Uncle Joe, who is quality entertainment these days, as a functioning leader of probably the biggest power on the planet until recently. That's not a particularly edifying thought that he's in charge over there. But it does seem to fit a bit of a pattern of idiots.
Hang on, bro. Did you say functioning? I think that's questionable.
Well, yes, it is. It's all very questionable. But yeah, so let's have a little look at what's been going on here in this piece in Britain over the last couple of months, because it is a farce, starting with mistrust winning. And this is an interesting thing I want to bring up too, right? So how come before, where the whole of Britain had to go through a piece watching the Prime Minister get elected, but with only 200,000 odd people being Conservative Party members actually getting a say in that? So for that particular occasion, it had to be, I think, 2 or 3 months, the whole process. There was a period of elimination, and then there was the hustings and doing the rounds. And of course, both Rasheed and Mistrust managed to drop themselves firmly in the poop by, deciding to either press the button on a nuclear bomb, as I think Mistrust had said that she was happy to do, which is a very important statement, which we're going to come to in a minute about her. maybe why she was in power in the first place. But of course, good old Mr. Sanook was also the guy that was heard to oversay that he was quite happy to rob the poor to give more to the rich, which of course is not a particularly good thing to say in the middle of cost of living crisis or generally at all. And here's another interesting thing about Mr. Sanook that's come up a lot, and that is that even though he is the first Asian prime minister ever to be elected to Britain, he's universally been pretty much disowned by most Asian communities in Britain, from what I can see. A lot of prominent Asian people have come out and said that seeing him in power is nothing that they're particularly happy about. Doesn't fill them with glee or any sense of joy or, sense of pride even, which I think is interesting. So he's basically friendless. And this is what I got from this guy from the moment he entered politics, was he seemed like a guy with a lot of money who had to basically buy his way to sit at the table with all the other chaps that he wanted to be friends with, the old Etonians and all of those rumbustious boys, such as Mr. Johnson and Mr. Cameron and all of those wonderful chaps that have gone before him. And so what I see really is a guy that's bought his way into the mix with his money. And, or rather, it's not even his money, really, actually. I mean, here's another interesting thing about Rasheed. He's a hedge fund manager really by origin, and we'll get to why that's important in a minute too. But his wife is, as you pointed out, one of the richest women in the world, because her daddy's company, I believe, are Infosys, which is an Indian-based IT company, which amongst other things does also produce digital ID chips, which I think is an interesting link. And yes, of course, Mr. Sanook is very much linked to our good old friend over at the WF, Mr. Ming the Merciless, otherwise known as Mr. Schwab, with his amazing outfits. The guy has an incredible wardrobe, I will give him that much. Definitely, I think possibly got some hand-me-downs from the Flash Gordon movie. But without wanting to diss Mr. Schwab too much, because I'm sure he's really a good guy and he's wanting to oversee a new way of being, a new world order maybe. And it seems as if Mr. Sanook or Sunak even is, along with Buzz Lightyear, Mr. Karma, part of that gang. So a few bits and pieces in there, which I think is starting to point towards something. But the other bit that I want to bring in now before bounce back to you is the piece that's come up in the last few days where the Russians, who've been obviously clearly put out that their pipe stream was blown up by somebody. Everyone said from the beginning it was sabotage. Strangely, many fingers were pointed at the Russians for blowing up their own pipe stream, which seems like a strange idea, not very logical. So I don't know what that's all about there. But when we investigate a bit further, we got to find out that the Baltic nations of Sweden, Germany, and Denmark did not want to share any of their investigation reports, which the Russians thought was strange and led them to conclude that maybe they had something to hide, which seems like a fairly rational and logical conclusion to come to. But then this week, it's been somehow revealed, I think through a phone hack possibly, that Ms. Trust had messaged Antony Blinken, the US, I think, Secretary of State, is that right? Or is he the Defense Secretary of State, several minutes after the explosions were heard, with a text message saying it's done. Now, of course, it's been highly refuted on all sides, but one has to think that maybe the Russians do have pretty good intelligence. I was tracking what happened with the explosion in the Crimea Bridge, which is one of the few sabotage attempts that actually have succeeded. But what I found amazing was that within several hours, the Russians had managed to track the truck that blew up the bridge back through a bewildering number of countries, I think maybe 13 or something, ranging over a 6 to 12 month period. I'm like, that's pretty impressive intel that you've managed to rattle on this truck in the space of, I think, just a few hours. So it tends to suggest that these guys have a pretty good finger on the pulse with their surveillance. So a few bits and pieces there, bro. What have you got in response?
Well, I want to go back to Rasheed Sanook before we leave him, and what your comments about how quick it didn't take them long to find a replacement for the malfunctioning puppet that was Mistrust. And I think it's a question of, here's one we made earlier, isn't it? It's like he was sort of ready, and then no, that one didn't work, so we'll just put this one in. They didn't really have a choice. They had a choice, of course. They could have gone for Boris again. I'm quite sad they didn't, in a way, but only because I just enjoy pillorying him. But the thing about I just want to say about Rasheed is that he's always struck me me as, like a bit of a wannabe. I want to be with the bully boys, the Bullingdon boys and all of that.
Yeah.
But he forgot, when it comes to costume, we talked about Mr. Schwab, but I think Rishi missed a trick. He should have remembered his school cap, because it would look perfect on him.
Right. That's his whole image, right? It's the little schoolboy.
Totally.
But with his £500 pair of Prada shoes that he thought would be a clever idea to wear in a very working class environment where people haven't seen £500 probably for a very long time.
No, for a long time.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have what people might call the common touch. And of course, we are really closet Boris fans, both of us. And we love the old boy a lot because he's given us a lot of value. But at least he had a personality that was somewhat, interesting, if nothing else. So, yeah, just to bounce back on that piece. So how come we had to go through a 3-month leadership process, but this time round, nobody got to have a vote, not even the Conservative Party members. In fact, nobody stood. So how come, again, we have another Prime Minister, and this one's even less democratic than the previous one, which was barely democratic at all. We now have another leader who hasn't been voted for by anybody, literally. So how did he get to be the Prime Minister? I think it's really the big question that everyone should be asking is like, what kind of democratic system put this chap in charge?
Well, I kind of wonder how he was strong-armed into jumping into probably what was the biggest black hole that's appeared in recent history, because I think that the reason why they didn't have anybody else standing was nobody else wanted the job. I mean, it's a poison chalice if ever there was one.
Well, but possibly partly of his making, actually, because this piece about the hedge fund is interesting, because probably many of our listeners and many people worldwide are not aware that all of the central banks of pretty much every country in the world were declared bankrupt about a month ago because they couldn't come up with the gold that was meant to back the paper money. And so here was the big announcement that I had to chuckle at a few weeks back, while Mistrust was still trying to work out how to square the circle, which was like the Bank of England announced that they would be stopping quantitative easing, otherwise known as printing paper money, in the background, and that would happen the following week, which is exactly what happened. She got rid of Kamikaze that day. He had to bow out, and Mr. Hunt came in, and so what's interesting here is that effectively is that Britain is bankrupt. We're not allowed to print money anymore. There's no money in the coffers. Whatever there was in the first place was completely empty by the previous guys during the whole 2-year episode that we've been in. So what on earth is actually holding up the British economy? Well, in comes Mr. Sanook, the hedge fund manager, who probably was a large part of all of the shenanigans that created this problem in the first place. And, again, like you were saying about the government paying for stuff, good old Reddy gave lots of us, handouts basically during the first year of the lockdowns, which of course was very generous of him, considering really he was just in the back room with his machine peddling and printing the money. So he built his whole political persona on being the nice guy that gave away lots of money, which of course was never really there in the first place. So I feel that Mr. Sanook has been strong-armed into this position because he's going to have to take a very, very public humiliation around all of this, as indeed I think are many of the politicians. Mistrust has already been publicly humiliated, but if what the Russians are accusing her of is true, that's much worse, much worse, because then she would be actually involved in a process that would actually involve many people in Europe not having any heating this winter, which is not a very nice thing to do to millions of people. So there's that in the piece too, right? So, and we'll get to this one later, but I just want to chuck it into the mix now because it's relevant, and that is our friend Mr. Hancock, Mr. Matt Hancock, doing "I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here." Now, it seems like a strange link, but we'll come to that in a minute. So where does that take us, bro, in terms of why we have this guy in charge? Where's the money? What can he do before the 17th of November? Because that's the bumped date, right, that Mr. Hunt decided to bump the budget review from Halloween down to. So what I get a feeling is that these guys are trying to buy time to work out how to explain to everybody that there's no money and we're bankrupt. And I'm wondering when Britain's going to default on a payment to something, which I imagine must be fairly soon, possibly sometime around the 17th of November. One might speculate.
Well, who knows? We can only wait and see. The directions are, or the misdirections are, as as confusing as ever, I feel. But, you know, to some
Mm,
extent, it is reading in the stars, isn't it? And I know that's something that you yourself have looked into a lot.
mm,
And
mm.
generally speaking, on those issues, tend to trust your insight and intuition and those of your advisors who also comment on these things. I have no doubt whatsoever that we're in a raft of revelations.
Mm.
Um, and I'm sort of, you know, there are a lot of people out there, various sort of esoteric channels saying that people are going to be really, really shocked, and I'm sure they are. But you know, I don't know. They're saying everybody's going to be shocked, but I don't feel I'm going to be shocked. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I will be shocked. But I think for me, it just feels like, well, you know, didn't we always know somewhere that these people were wrong uns? You know, and I just keep the other thing. You know, I don't even want to go there really, but the paedophilia side of things is sort of rearing its head a little bit as well at the
Yeah.
moment. And I think that was kind of on the back of the departure of a certain key figure,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever might have taken her place. Um,
Right.
I think that's going to be some of the shocking stuff, and I think it's probably going to take that. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are banking on that, maybe that it's going to take that to turn people's heads. But then we also have to bear in mind the fact that there's been a lot of work done over a long period of time to dumb and numb the population so that, you know, either they don't believe stuff when they see it, and there's a lot of that going on,
Yeah.
you know, in certain areas that we are not allowed to comment on,
Mm-hmm.
but also that, you know, that there's this kind of paralysis, really. I think I see a lot. I see what I see out there is paralysis. So that the question constantly arises: why don't we just rise up and say no? And because we're paralyzed, or not all of us
Yes.
are, but you know, those of us who are not, will have to find another way of working, which is what you and I are into, bro. Really.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we're going to have to look after ourselves and those near us in ways that rely on other skills, shall we
Yeah.
say? I'm talking here of
You still
I
there,
guess
bro? We lost you. Oh, I think we lost you there for a
I'm.
second.
Did you
Yeah.
lose me? I'm sorry. I don't know how much of that you got. I was just basically saying that for me, it pushes me back into what I'm going to call magic,
Yes. Yes.
because it's the
Manifestation.
only uh,
Magic and manifestation, which are really kind of
magic and manifestation.
yeah.
You know, because nothing else will work, and I think that's where we've got to.
So this is an important point, and I'm glad you've kind of brought these threads in too. And sure, the stuff about the children is difficult, and you know, particularly in my line of work, you know, dealing with extractions and traumas, I see a lot of these things in people's fields, and I feel that child abuse is something that has been pretty endemic across the planet for a very long time, much more than we've all been able to look at ourselves. And the people that have been doing it are people that we, well, maybe not me and you for sure, and maybe not quite a few other people, but the world at large would find difficult to stomach the people who've been involved in this. Pretty much anyone you can think of is in a position of power or celebrity is involved. And that's going to be difficult for people to see. But it's very important because it's something that I think as a collective species, we've all suffered from and been kept in a place of silence or shame or all of these things and worse in many cases. And so what I see is that we're on the precipice of three major revelations. One is the financial situation, which we do see potentially leading to the CBDC, the central bank and digital currencies, which maybe we'll get to in a minute. The second is the revelations about the children and the trafficking, which is very difficult for most of us to look at. Even I find that one difficult to look at. Still, the energy around it is so rancid at the energetic level. And the third one is the possibility of a nuclear attack or a false flag nuclear attack. All three of those, I think, are being very much either held back or waiting to drop in. And there is a certain level of frustration with many of us at the moment that we anticipated that looking at the astrology strategy and the movements and everything that's going on at the moment, and seeing how many of these pieces are about to drop that one of them hasn't dropped already. And so I've been meditating a lot over the last few days, wondering why this is. And I do feel that there is a blockage within the collective, and that blockage is born out of fear, and possibly also shame too in some places. But also we've got a blockage in our throat chakra. That's something that's been coming up for many of us who've been doing the elder immersion during this last 2 weeks. Which I think is interesting. Maybe we'll get to at the end. So we've got these three major pieces, all of which would be shocking, particularly the one around the children, the trafficking, because so many well-known people are involved in that, and already the pieces are starting to fall. I don't know if anyone managed to catch the very humorous piece that Ricky Gervais did at I think it was the Golden Globe Awards, where he pretty much outed everybody in the crowd. If you haven't seen that one, definitely recommend it. It's Mr. Gervais at his very best, and of course he's also been a guy that's been at the center of promoting certain medications too, so one has to wonder whether he's cut a deal or been strong-armed into doing stuff. And this leads me nicely on to Mr. Hancock, who I'm wondering whether he's been strong-armed into going on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which of course he's lost the whip for in his own party. You want to spare any thoughts on this one, dude?
Well, I think we were talking just before this and saying, he's the one person that we would rather like to see in a very uncomfortable situation. And it's, so for me, that's a gift, because everybody who goes on that program is going to be humiliated. That's part of what it's about. And I hope with him that the humiliation is just long enough to be unbearable for him, but not long enough to actually get him to win it and come out looking like some kind of hero. So my hope is that he fares a little bit more similarly to Johnson Senior, actually, who was dispatched sort of about 2/3 of the way through, 3/4 of the way through, or something. Or is that true, or did he win it? I can't remember. It's all.
I've honestly never watched it, bro. So
no, I know. I watched. I think I watched one episode when Johnson Senior was there, and I thought, what on earth is that about? And then he sort of seemed to be sort of garnering some level of public support, even though most people actually detested his son at the time. It was before he was Prime Minister, for sure. I think he was just coming out of the Mayor of London days, probably. I mean, I've almost called him his nickname, which I shouldn't do on this podcast. But Hancock, I think, I mean, a sorry little character who was actually humiliated and had to leave office because somebody managed to grab a shot of him groping his secretary. And subsequently, of course, his marriage ended and he lost his job, etc. So I mean, I guess he's not got much to fall back on now. I mean, I think those shows very often are populated by people anxious to rebuild their public image in some way, and I see that very much in his case as well. Whether there's another narrative behind that would be very interesting to see. You were saying that you think maybe the humiliation would also bring forth some revelations around the fire from Mr. Hancock, and if that happens, then I mean, the problem with that is that the whole thing will be edited, so whatever he says we may not get to see. And that's the whole thing about those shows as well, is that the media is still very firmly in control of what we're actually shown. So I don't know whether to expect anything on that front, unless it's a programmed revelation.
Well, this is what I'm wondering, right? And we'll talk about freedom of speech and stuff in a minute in relation to our friend the Musketeer and Twitter and a whole bunch of stuff. But again, maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, but Mr. Hancock has gone out on a limb on this one. He's been basically had the whip taken away, so he's no longer a member of the Conservative Party, as I understand it. So he's now an independent MP, or currently in the party. He's taking time off to go and have a jolly up in the jungle when people are starving and cold and all of the rest of it. He's been roundly denounced by his fellow MPs. So it seems like a strange move for this guy. So I want to look back to the groping piece in the lift, because even at the time, I thought, well, you know what, man, and even the way that Mr. Johnson resigned over not, he gave a position, didn't he, to one of his colleagues who was then found to be also groping, I think, men in the bar. So there's definitely a groping theme here to how these two left office, which I think is an interesting link. But if you think about,
A groping theme, I love it.
yeah, well, there is, right? There's definitely
Yeah.
a groping theme that helped both of these characters leave office. So maybe we can look at that also from a more symbolic, energetic standpoint. But then I'm like, you know what, man? These guys, considering the untold crimes that they have committed over the last few years, of which hopefully they will come to light, for them to leave office for these two sort of really relatively minor misdemeanors in comparison, I always thought was strange. And I wondered whether they were being bundled out of office because they've been caught red-handed with their fingers in the till. And of course, Mr. Hancock is a very rich man, and probably a lot richer off the back of pandemic and all of the contracts he gave to his friends, including his publican.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that story.
Yeah,
To produce face masks. So Mr. Hancock has a lot of questions around him. And of course, neither me or you are particularly big fans of this guy. We do get a lot of amusement from his surnames. I'm sure our audience will probably clock, but we're not going to be using those on this podcast. But I'm wondering whether Matt might get drunk around the fireplace and being the pompous, entitled guy that he is, decide to share some of his experiences about what a clever guy is and how maybe he managed to pull the wool over the whole of the British nation. And that would be an amazing revelation for him to come out around the fireplace with. So I'm wondering whether there is some programming going on here, because what better way to get the information out to people than on a primetime show with a politician who's basically spilling the beans, which seems like a bit of a long shot, but we do have the fact that Mr. Musk has bought Twitter this week and seems to be freeing up a lot of blocked accounts. So I'm wondering whether there is a freeing up of disclosure and speech. What do you think, dude?
Well, it could be, and all I can say about that is I'm now going to have to watch the bloody program just to find out. I don't know whether you can get it in Mexico. I hate it.
There's always a way, bro. There's always a way.
There's always a way, yeah. As for the Musketeer and the Twitter thing, I mean, that's been bouncing backwards and forwards for a while now, and I'm kind of quite relieved in a way that it's finally gone through, because I mean, I don't trust anybody with that much money, and he's a very strange character. There was footage of him dancing, which was very strange indeed. And they kept going back to it. You know, there'd one footage from one angle and then another camera angle, and he was doing this really strange, slightly robotic dance and looking like, you know, he was really enjoying it. It reminded me a little bit of Mrs. May at the Tory party conference a few years ago.
Oh, God. I thought, put that image out of my head. I forgot about that. That's not something anyone needs to remember.
No, well, he was dancing in front of a picture of a Tesla, and I just kind of thought, what's that about? I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, obviously it's encouraging if he is freeing up, and if there is more freedom of speech coming, and that means that will open the way maybe for for people to start to discuss things more freely and say, disclose information that really we need to hear. But I mean, I was just about to go into a forbidden area there, but there have been quite a lot of disclosures lately that seems to have left no mark whatsoever on the majority of people, including, as you said earlier, our favorite Uncle Joe getting his sweetie drops on stage with Tony Fauci in the background. And in complete ignorance of what we know about the research and development that went into those particular sweetie drops, and all the mayhem around that, and the disclosures that are coming out around the adverse events connected with that particular initiative. So, I would welcome any kind of increase in the level of disclosure, as you know, but I do have a level of mistrust about that, because I actually think that, I'm still not absolutely certain that we're going to be told anything that is meaningful whilst certain people are in charge. But then who is in charge? We don't really know.
Big question, right? Who is in charge? I'd like to start positing the idea that we're in charge.
Well, maybe.
That would be nice. That would be very nice. And here's an interesting thought, just to bring it into this space with this as well. So a little while ago, got chatting to the Ascending Master Zach, channeled by my friend Janet. and got to asking him about the future of digital currencies and minerals and metals. And to share what he said, basically, from what he could see, there was no one definitive timeline where there was already an agreed format for the currencies or, derivatives of the future. What he actually saw and shared was that there would be many sort of, it's going to be this. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Oh, it's going to be this. Okay, that's not going to work. Particularly around the crypto, the digital currencies. And when he was asked why he saw that level of fluidity, he said, what I see is that there's a collective level of distrust of all of these new things. And, we asked whether the quantum financial system had been hijacked. And he said, well, it was a really good idea, but yes, it has been hijacked. Maybe he was meaning through the CBDC, which is the central banking digital currencies, which, of course, is going to be rolled out by all of these central banks who are, of course, bankrupt. So they've got a vested interest to roll out that new system. And of course, our friend, Mr. Steer Karma, he's very much in that room too. So I'm wondering whether, even though Miss Trust only got to do 40-something days as Prime Minister, I would be willing to put some money on it that Mr. Sanook might even last less long, because somehow he's got to explain to everybody what's happened here. So I think this is all very interesting. But the piece I want to come to is about the collective trust in the quantum space of the future and of New Earth. If we are truly quantum, there will be a collective decision made on which one we trust. And then once we all decide this is what we're going to go with, then that will be what we go with. But until then, it's very difficult for any of us, myself included, to trust any particular narrative that's being presented, because I just don't see that many characters in the bigger picture that I trust at all. And maybe that's the bigger point here. We're still externalizing everything, looking at the world, waiting for it to offer us a solution, waiting for it to bring us the big reveal, the big incident.
Will it be Rishi?
I don't think it's going to be Rishi. No. Well, maybe. I don't see him necessarily into some of the other more nefarious things that we've talked about today, but I do definitely see that he's got his fingers in the finance pot, or has had them in some sort of finance pot, and maybe that's where his public humiliation is going to come. But the astrology dictates that this process can only go one way, and anything else that tries to tell us otherwise is simply a projection and a manipulation. And this, I think, is the big piece that humanity is being pushed, hashtag forced evolution, towards, is that we've got to stop looking outside of ourselves for all of the answers, and maybe start coming up with them ourselves and saying, like, you guys are finished. Again, the whole piece around magic and manifestation, when we're truly in that space of clarity between our heart and our higher mind, and we can go into the dreaming space of our higher mind with a clear terrain, as we've talked about before, and start dreaming from there, we're only been able to do up until now is to manifest strongly down into 3D, because the astral space, the 4D, the human emotional realm, has been so heavily manipulated and distorted that we've been receiving, instead of the clear messages from the higher realms, we've been getting all of this garbage being projected at us.
Yeah, very interesting thoughts there, and a number of things to meditate on. I feel that very much where we're talking about the 4D distortions, that is very much what I'm encountering in the people that I'm dealing with as well. There doesn't seem to be an ability. There doesn't seem to be clarity between the higher mind and the heart at all. In fact, I don't think most people have even got as far as the heart, frankly.
On the higher mind.
and I think also, I want to go back to your three major, bases of revelation, where you said finance, children, and nuclear. I've got written down here. And the thing that I think for me, and you actually used this word, and I think I'd already written it down while you were talking, and the thing that links them all is the word fear, or the concept fear, because all of them arouse fear in huge proportions, really insane fear, and fear of things that are almost too big for us to comprehend. The finances of the planet, and given the colossal sums of money that some people command, and in comparison with us, we feel powerless, and we fear what will be taken away. If you've got any money in the bank, we're now fearing that it won't be there in a few months' time, or even a few weeks' time. We're fearing that the whole thing might actually crash us as individuals, and the children thing is unthinkable from the start, and the nuclear thing likewise. If they start that game, then what are we going to be able to do about that? And my own response to that, my own response in the face of that fear is actually to say the enemy is fear. And
Yes.
I refuse to be in a fearful state. I absolutely refuse to do that. So I'm very, very clear about that. And I'm lucky in a sense, because I have got to the space now, eventually, where I can operate. I think, I'm not boasting here, I hope, but I can. Usually, most of the time, I do get sucked into things occasionally, but basically most of the time I can operate on a higher level. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the throat and Yarrow, and I have a sort of an observation about that ahead of time, which is that I found myself, and this is quite an odd one, and again, it's something that I'm kind of putting out there without really knowing how it's going to be received, but I've personally experienced a freeing up of my voice over the last few weeks. I've done a couple of quite prominent lectures or talks to fellow professionals, particularly, and I found myself almost in a zone that I previously only dreamed of, or I've attained at certain points, but things that have come through me have astonished even me, and I've actually gone away thinking, oh my God, I didn't intend to say any of that, but somehow I felt that I had to say it. And I think it's sort of knocked a few people sideways, but most people are sort of really responding to that. And I don't know where it's coming on from or what it means in me personally, but I feel that there's a big need for speakers. And I think both you and I are speakers. And what I mean by that is somebody who are people who can bring those truths down from the higher dimensions and spread the understanding, even if it's only on a temporary basis or an occasional basis. But the more we expose people to hearing this kind of stuff, the more likelihood is they're going to somehow latch onto it and be motivated to explore it in themselves. Because I actually totally agree with you that the power lies within us. And that's what we've all got to realize. And when I work a lot with people. I work with people on their own self-healing, just as you do. And my message to them is very, very simple, actually. You come to me because you think I'm the big expert and you're going to pay me. I'm not cheap. But that's, and I appreciate that very much. But actually, all I'm doing is trying to get you to see what's inside yourself, because you're the one who's going to be doing the healing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, bro. Many things just to bounce back there too. And so fear of speaking our truth also is a big one, which I think is the throat chakra blockages that we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute, because it's one of the major themes that's come out of the elder immersion that we've been doing together and with many other people all over the world over the last few weeks, and that will be finishing tomorrow, is this whole piece about speaking up and speaking our truth. And one of the beautiful things I have to share really from my side is doing this podcast with you has helped me also get better at expressing myself. I have to thank the wonderful Pam Gregory, the astrologer, for really giving me an opportunity to get better at doing that. And of course, that's actually helped generate many things that are going on in my life right now through becoming better at speaking. And I had to do a lot of work on my throat chakra with Yarrow around that time, because when you put yourself in front of an audience of 100,000 people plus in Pam's case, and everyone's tuning in to watch her, and then some other chap turns up who's suddenly talking about plants and a whole bunch of other stuff, people are like, who the hell's this guy? So you get a lot of reflection coming through the comments, and I have to say that thankfully they were all pretty decent on all the videos I've done, but I definitely had a few moments in the early videos like, oh my God, like what have I opened myself up to here? Like, maybe people are going to hate me, or for the things that I say. But through doing the Web of Wyrd with you and with Paul previously, and through doing the other YouTube podcasts, and through doing the immersions, I've seen both myself get better at speaking, but also everyone who I'm doing the transmissions with, you especially, bro. Since we did the training last year, it's like a whole new level of higher stuff is coming through every time we do the calls. And I get the same kick when I do the podcast with Emily, or I get to do the astrology with Kelly. It's like, wow, once we get into that space of just being free and just letting the information information come through and being in the moment. That's what I love. You know, we do a little bit of prep for these podcasts, but we really just pick out the key themes and let the story unfold by itself. And I think that this is a big part of humanity, really, that we've been given a story from somebody else, a story about our own origins as a species, stories about our history. And I'm wondering how much of anything I was taught at school about history is in any way true. And it's maybe just a bunch of narratives written by a storyteller somewhere. So this whole piece about fear is also about letting go. And I did talk about this on a previous podcast with Sergey, the Wachuma guy, and we talked about fear being a choice. And not everybody liked that idea, from what I understand. And it's just like, you know, everything is a choice. And being in a place of fear is also a choice. And it's not an easy one to let go of, because we've got so much of it coming at us, being programmed into us. But once we get to that place in our hearts, connected to our higher minds, and we're in a place of trust, then fear doesn't really have any space in that frequency, in the frequency of the heart and the frequency of trust. And yeah, you know, there are many things that we can't control in this world. So just bring it back to the things that you can control. If all of the global currencies in the world are going to collapse, then we're all in the same boat together. So we're all going to lose everything we've got all together. So then we're all going to be starting in the same place together. You know, there's always a way of looking at everything that makes it okay. And that's where Senor El Dandolero comes in. It's just like, look, dude, it's always perfect, you know? So let's talk a little bit about the throat chakra and about a plant that we both know, that we both work with in the throat chakra, which is yarrow. So where do you want to start with this one, bro?
Well, I want to start really with, one thing that really struck me, and again, this came through on the immersion in the workshop that we did last year, just over a year ago, and it really, really resonated with me, because I am a wordsmith. Language is my thing, speaking is my thing, writing is my thing. You know, this is in a way the skill set that I came to the planet with, and I need to use it. But one of the things that really struck me about when you were talking about yarrow was this business about economy of speech. I don't always achieve it, but I strive for it. I strive for the expression that's going to be the most economical and efficient way of saying what I need to say. And when I'm listening to other people speak, and I'm not being judgmental at all, but I'm actually thinking, actually get to the point. You know, I'm feeling a little bit impatient. Get to the point. This is just words. You don't really need all of those words. Maybe people think that of me when I'm speaking on these podcasts. I don't know, but I do have this thing when I'm writing, particularly I'm a craftsman, you know, of actually making sure that what I'm saying is absolutely precise. And I'm doing a lot of work at the moment with some students on a particular branch of something that I do, which you know about, which we haven't yet ever talked about, and that is iridology, the examination and the interpretation of the eyes. And there is a lot of commentary on that one about the role of the throat and the voice in manifesting the perceptions of the heart. And I think that for me, yarrow is the herb to help with this. It is a herb I use for helping with problems of the upper respiratory tract, particularly. It's a herb that I bring into the picture as soon as anybody's coming down with a cold, whatever that is, or the flu or something like that. But also in the residual stages of the cold and the flu, when you've got all this catarrh and phlegm sort of pouring out of you, it's very, very good at being able to help clear that out. One of the things it does, of course, it's also a diaphoretic, so it helps to push things out through the skin, and that will relieve some of the channels of elimination, the lymph system, etc., that might otherwise build things up through, into the obvious areas like the throat. So I do think that it is a herb that is about economy, and it's about again somehow forging a clear channel through that very, very important center, the throat center, and its direction is definitely, in my view, is kind of an upward direction as well. I don't know whether you resonate with that at all, but I see it very much as coming up. And and by the way, it's a heart protective herb as well, because it is hypotensive. It takes down blood pressure. So I see it very much as opening that channel between the heart and the throat, and thereby allowing, the heart's insights and perceptions to come to come through. And I realize I'm talking about Yarrow in a sort of an energetic sense there, whereas normally I might talk about it much more from a sort of medical perspective. But from, you know, a traditional herbal perspective, it's so many things. It's a diuretic, so it increases elimination through the kidneys. It is a bitter tonic, so it helps with digestion. It is, and I don't use the word without a slight hesitation, but it is an antiviral. It's very, very good at treating what we call viral illness from that point of view. What else to say about it? A vulnerary. It's a wound healer as well. And that was the original way it got its, you know, it got its name from Achilles, who chose it to dress the wounds of his soldiers. So yeah, fantastic. And I've Yarrow's been with me for a long time. But I keep discovering more about this one.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, you know, we've been talking about plants all year and of course doing the immersions too. And what I find interesting is that even with your longevity as a herbalist and all that you know, it's just like how in your life that you ended up working with the same plants that I've ended up working in my work too. And it's just like, wow, you know, we often seem to be working with the same plants for the same reasons in slightly different contexts. But yeah, you said a lot there about yarrow, and I have a feeling that maybe yarrow is a plant that we might do a bigger piece on at some point for the quantum plant healing site. So that's something I'd like to explore with you, because it's a very interesting plant. And as you said, you know, its name is Achillea millefolium, which comes from Achilles. And the story goes that that yarrow was first formed by a drop of rust that came from his, I think, one of his leg plates onto the ground, and the plant sprung up, otherwise known as staunchweed, to help bind and staunch the flow of blood in his own soldiers' wounds. So, and this is also, you know, I work with yarrow as my gender balancing plant. Sometimes people have a slight masculine or feminine imbalance. I'm not going to go into the whole woke space. That's something else altogether. But and I find it interesting because Achilles himself was, of course, bisexual, and the flowers appear both pink and white, which speaks to me of both sexes too. But that's a slight side note. But the whole thing about the throat and the heart protection, I didn't know that. That's super interesting. And you know, I kind of see that every chakra in the, you know, the body system is connected, but always the ones that are immediately adjacent seem to have an extra connection. So for the throat, that would be the heart and the third eye. And as we've talked about before, you know, the throat chakra also has the rear psychic chakra, which is how I've often, you know, understood that it's the shaman chakra really, because it's where the energy comes in and we process it in our throat. But if we've got that good connection to our heart and to our third eye, we can process it with much more clarity, the clarity of the heart and the clarity of being able to see in the astral plane with a clear terrain. And when we've got both the heart connected and the terrain clear, then, you know, the connection to higher self is much better. And then we can start to channel from our higher selves, and what comes out of our mouths is a much higher impulse. But we have to have the heart space nice and clean and clear and protected. We have to have our own astral terrain, you know, emotional body space nice and clean and clear. And then we can start to speak our truth. But maybe the part of the reason that we are afraid of speaking our truth is because we've been so heavily distorted that we don't really know what our truth is. And so when we go to speak it, it comes out sometimes maybe with these distortions, which leaves us open and vulnerable to people taking the mickey or persecuting us or trolling us or whatever. And of course, if we're in a place of trust about what we're saying, then we shouldn't have any of those things, because it's like, no, this is what's coming from my heart. If you don't like it, sod off, basically. And if you do like it, great, let's continue the conversation. And I think that this is also about becoming sovereign and, you know, understanding that what comes from our heart is what comes from our heart. And it's not necessarily something that has to be given an opinion about by somebody else that then we absorb. It's just something that is, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and actually to get to that space is a wonderful thing. And you know, as I said, I don't want to. I made a few comments about my own recent experiences, and it quite surprised me. And I did have those moments of, oh my God, you know, am I going to be ridiculed? Am I going to be censored in some way, or censured in some way for this? And then I realized that actually it was a gift, in a sense, not just to me, but to my audience at the time, and that they could do with it what they wanted, but I had no regrets. Getting better at that these days. I mean, sometimes when you're teaching in the way that I do. You're teaching on a particular, it is a accredited degree level course. You have to be quite careful about what you're putting out. You have to be within the tradition that you're speaking in. If you go too far outside of it, then you're likely to offend, maybe only a very few people. I have offended people in the past, and
Really?
yeah, believe it or
I find
not.
that hard to believe, bro.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, yeah. I've had some. I had some classics actually, which I could tell you about at some stage. There was one person who challenged me when I came up with something which was like, well, there isn't a human being on the planet that hasn't been traumatized. And she was really upset about that. She never came back. She said, "I don't see how you can say that. That's completely ridiculous." I said that, and she said, "This was her undoing." She said, "I think there might be some high lamas in Tibet who disagree with you on that one." And I said, "Oh yeah, Tibet. That's right. That's the home of Tibetan Buddhism, isn't it? Buddhism, which apparently believes that life is suffering." And I think I'd sort of got her with that. She shut up.
Right.
But she never came back. Do you know what I mean? So I've always sort of got my eye on those kind of those situations in the classroom where I might just say something a little bit too challenging, and then I'll be reported. It hasn't really happened yet, I have to say, but yeah, those the kind of fear factor, if you like, when you start speaking out, it's a bit like the sort of caution. I won't call it fear, but the caution that we both experience about covering certain topics on these podcasts and getting struck off dear old YT.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, right? And in the context of all of this, of course, we do have that situation to deal with, being edited in various ways, but at the same time playing the game, so it's a tricky one. And we should never mix caution up with fear, because that's sometimes something that I get back when we talk about fear is, oh, well, if you didn't have fear, then this and this and this. And, the example that's sometimes used about crossing the road, an animal decides not to stand in the middle of the road because it has fear. And I'm just like, well, I think it's just being smart. Standing in the road with oncoming traffic towards you, and the decision to move out the way is not based on fear. It's just based on common sense.
Common sense.
So I feel like we have to be very discerning about these different emotional situations, and whether we're in a place of caution and common sense, or actually genuine in the place of fear.
It's a good distinction to make. Yeah, I agree.
So, as always with these rambles around the web, the twanging of the web of Wyrd, as we like to say, we've covered quite a bit today. It has been very focused on what's going on in the political situation in Britain, but I kind of feel that that's actually pretty much a mirror of many things going on in many places, including what's going on in Brazil, and we have to see what's going to happen there. And, it's very easy to get polarized at these times. And when one option is kind of shown to be a busted flush, it's very easy to jump to the other option that's being presented. And I think that that's something that could very strongly happen in quite a few countries, particularly in Europe and Britain over the next few weeks. It's like, oh my God, like that guy's so bad, we're just going to take the next guy.
Yeah.
Is going to come in. It's just like, okay, you know what, man, you're all jokers, you're all bad guys, you're all fleecing me, you're all robbing me, making things up and deluding me, and actually I don't like any of you, and I don't want any of you to be in charge of me, because that's ultimately my decision to make, right? Who got to decide that you're in charge of me? I didn't. So how does that work? And I think this is a big question that humanity should be asking itself en masse. It's like, okay, let's do away with that Capricornian top-down system and start thinking more about Uranus in Taurus, grassroots up, and start organizing ourselves at that level by being able to speak truth about who we are, and start to resonate with people around us who also feel the same. And I've got to say, that's one of the beautiful things that's come out of the immersions over the last few months, is this whole concept of like being in a container where people feel safe to express themselves. And in doing so, it helps other people to express themselves. And of course, you've seen this on retreats too. The sharing is caring part is very important, because when one of us is brave enough to speak out without fear about stuff, it empowers other people to do the same. And I feel that this is one of the real deep qualities of Yarrow. And you nailed it. The magic of Yarrow is intentional restraint. That was a mantra that came during my piece, My Diet with Yarrow. And I really understand that. It's about efficiency of energy, efficiency of expression, but clarity. And when you get all of those things right, that's when you're really starting to get more into magic. Because when we're clear and focused and in our hearts, we can really do good magic, manifestation magic from our higher minds down into the three-dimensional world. And that is what is going to create New Earth. Not a bunch of politicians asking us to swap one bunch of politicians for another. I don't believe that that's the way forwards. And again, these are all concepts that we have to break down. And even letting go of democracy, that could be kind of big for Europeans.
Yeah.
Something that they believe to be trust and true and honest, only to find out that it's probably deeply corrupt and always has been. Another big letting go. And of course, that creates panic. Well, look, there's no government. Who's in charge? How about you being in charge, buddy, of yourself? Wow, that's a big one, right? So, we're trying to. Yeah, I feel like today, what's really coming through is, again, this idea of speaking up for ourselves, being in our own clear space of integrity and sovereignty, and not believing the BS that's constantly being pumped at us, and being able to discern what might be true and what's not. And in the end, if it doesn't bother us, then don't bother wasting any time looking into it. But if it's something that does affect you, look into it deeply with the plants, with wormwood especially, and other medicines, and see for yourself what is your truth in all of this situation, and work with that rather than accept something that somebody's offering you.
Aho.
Thank you, bro.
That's all I've got to say about that, bro. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yes, it's good to be back in conversation with you, dude. Hopefully it won't be several months. And yes, much as we enjoyed the live broadcast from Greece, it's good to have you back on terra firma, back in good old Blighty. And hopefully we'll be back in again in a couple of weeks. But do you have a final thought for today, bro? Anything you wish to share that we haven't already covered?
Not really. I did have I wanted to just pay a passing homage to the dear old Queen, because we did a piece on her before. It was something to do with a throne, if I remember rightly. Do you remember that one around the Jubilee? We commented that she'd been on the throne for a very long time. Do you remember that?
I do, yes. Go on.
And the term "on the throne" having something to do with something quite different in that.
Yes.
So I was just reminded of an event that happened to me when I was about 15. I was standing on the station at Red Hill waiting for my train home, and a man came up to me, and this is all about sovereignty, by the way, and I think it really says it quite nicely. If you'll just indulge me a moment, and he came up to me and said, "Your Queen's coming through here in a minute," and I said, "What?" And he said, "Your Queen's coming through here in a minute." And I said, with no shred of irony, I just said, "But I don't have a queen." And he looked at me like I was completely bonkers. I said, "What do you mean, my queen?" And he said, "Queen Elizabeth II." And I looked at him absolutely thunderstruck. And he obviously thought I was an idiot and just walked off in the other direction. And a few minutes later, she came through in a train, waving in a pink hat, that sort of thing. And I thought, what a load of rubbish. And I was quite, even at the time, I was conscious enough to think, actually, I don't have a queen. Like, I don't have a king now, and I don't have a ruler. And I think that happened to me quite spontaneously a long time ago. And I've counted myself lucky, really, for having had that perception. But I think the only thing I want to say, to finish off today, is I think we should dispense with all of that. As you said, we should think about who's in charge, and we should determine that it should be ourselves, each one of us. We have the power to determine how our lives will be run.
Yes.
What about that?
Yeah, I think that's aho, bro. Exactly. And the great ruler of all is the heart. And if we allow our own life to be ruled by our own heart, and it's in a good clear space, then I can only imagine that the world will become a much better place when everybody's in the heart and communicating with everybody else from the heart space with clear words and clear intention and clear ideas. There's no need for any of this top-down stuff. We can work together as a team and as a tribe, as a global family. And I think that once we start to do that, free of the manipulations and obscurations in the astral planes coming from various directions, then finally humanity will get to step up and be the galactic citizens that the universe so desperately wants us to be. This is a big experiment here, and there are many beings who have a vested interest to make it work, all of us included, who signed up for this great jamboree down here on planet Earth. And I would I would like to suggest that we are now moving into the very final pieces of the completion of that journey. And if we can let go of all of these other things that have been binding us and holding us and allow ourselves to be in that place of clear expression, we can start to fall in and express with the word our vision of New Earth. And I think that that's where it would be nice to finish today. So thank you, brother, as always.
Bring it on.
Bring it on, dude. Exactly. We have now a couple of months until the end of the year, or a bit less, until winter solstice and the return of the light on Christmas Day. And I have my attention and intention very firmly fixed on the return of the light on the 25th, because I think that will herald the start of something different. It might take a while for it to really start to manifest clearly in the world around us. But if we start doing the work now ourselves and disregarding these people on the TV, then we might start to find that we can create our own life. And anyone who knows me and you personally will know that we do that all of the time ourselves and create the world that we live in for ourselves. And we can all do that. We're all magicians at the end of the day. So thank you again, brother. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This is Wyrd, and we'll be back again very soon for another edition. Take care, everybody. Ciao for now.